Thank you all for being here. Very exciting. It's really awesome to hear that everyone's coming from such different places with it too. There's a lot that goes into this type of work, projection mapping, outside of just the software. And so like I said, this will be a very basic introduction, but I'll try to cover kind of like the main themes to think about so that you guys can definitely deep dive further in your practice of this as well too. Great. So I just wanted to show you kind of like a few examples of things that the mobile projection unit has done over the past couple of years. You can see it's really has expanded from like large, totally immersive installations right before the pandemic to being entirely outside post, or I guess this was also before pandemic, but you can see it's interesting to kind of like look at the different details of each of these installations and see how the ambient light affects the work, different structures that you can project on, how the light or how the colors interact with the color and texture of the materials that are behind it as well. And then also looking at the interaction by the audience and how they are in relation to the work itself too. As just kind of like a brief side note, I guess that's always probably one of the most like crucial decision-making steps that you'll do as you're creating these large installations, is just thinking about what is the physical relation to both your projector and your gear and the folks who are interacting with it too, and thinking about their safety and just the feasibility of the project itself. Yeah, and then these are just some examples of things. Some of these are quite simply mapped. You can see these are just like rectangles themselves. But this is also just trying to demonstrate how this can be such a mobile practice too. And this one certainly was probably our most mobile, just on the little back of a bicycle and a battery. And then you can also do many different types of sound installation with these as well. One of you was talking about sound. This was really interesting. We used an FM radio transmitter to transmit the audio from this documentary, which was an interesting, I guess, spatialized sound to help social distance during COVID too. Oh, okay. Okay. And yes, here's just another example of a drive-in using the FM transmitter.
FM transmitter, is there like at FCC, like as long as you're below a certain transmission rate, like you can
Yes.
do it without any problem?
Yes, I forget the exact like wattage that it is, but anything, don't quote me on this, maybe. But I'm pretty sure anything below a half a mile radius is within the FCC standards without alerting the FBI that you are pirate radioing. I think the model that I got, I just got it off of like Amazon or eBay or something for maybe like $40, and a lot of like churches use them, especially for like the parking lot sermons that they've been doing. So they're quite common. I think it might be like a half a watt. That sounds right, but yeah, they're fun to find, but just be careful. Yeah, make sure you check out FCC. Yeah, so then, so we had, mobile projection unit had been doing a lot of outdoor, more guerrilla type of installations and screenings with different cohort members that we had put together to provide gear. But as we were growing throughout the pandemic, we started getting some more commissions from different institutions who were looking for more safe, socially distant opportunities for people to still experience art. So here was one from the virtual VR expanded show in 2020 at the Northwest Film Center. And here you can kind of start to see some more of like these shapes taking form where we're specifically mapping like the columns and the archways and doing some background work too. Yeah, and then we did a series at the Portland Art Museum over the summer last year where we had 4 different iterations of collaborations working with different regional and West Coast artists. This was a show that we had collaborated with Keon Gaskin, who is a Portland-based performance artist, and also worked with Pamela Z, who we streamed in from San Francisco. And these were really fun projects because I think maybe you were talking about doing more like theater collaborations too. So we used a variety of softwares to create these performances. We used Isadora, which is an object-based coding software where we were able to do a lot of live mixing, and then we're able to patch those through to MadMapper, where we could basically use it as like a storytelling like timeline, where we could use that live generated content and really schedule it exactly where and when we wanted it to show up to on the buildings. And these were quite extensive projects. I believe we had 4 projectors covering the span of the courtyard. And I'm sure many of you may have been there before, where it's like in between the 2 buildings of the Portland Art Museum. And then we had like a little makeshift studio inside this little corridor right here too. So there's a lot of chords, which we'll see today too. There's a lot of chord management to think about. Sometimes when you're on the ground, it's a little bit hard to manage, but something to think about too. Yeah, and then these were just some other locations. This is when I was out in Spokane, Washington, with a residency called Laboratory, which many of you should look into. They do new media and video residencies, and they're really great, very supportive. And this was probably one of the only projects that they had last year, in that it was able to be outside or presented outside. So again, here's just like some examples of different textures and different spaces that you could projection map on, just to kind of start getting your mind thinking about different spaces rather than just blank walls. So these were both these kind of like giant rocks that were in the river in Spokane, and here's kind of like my my outdoor river rig with my my giant laptop and a projector. But that's a lot of the fun of it too. Again, like speaking to the relation of the gear to the object that you're mapping itself. Like a lot of these were just kind of tests and just kind of seeing what the material and the light and how they would combine. But you know, if this was a more elaborate installation, like what's a better situation for mounting this for maybe a more permanent event too. Yeah, and then here's just some more examples of different tests. So this was a bridge, and this was a giant water power building on the river. And again, yeah, just looking at, you know, like looking at the scene itself, like thinking about what an ideal situation is, which is complete darkness, which is very hard to find in the open. Probably one of my most successful outdoor projection experiences was at Caldera in Eastern Oregon. There's absolutely no light pollution there. It's really fun. And so that was probably one of the first times I was able to project on trees, just because it was really able to capture so much light from the projector itself. But, you know, you can still see, and depending on the luminosity of the projectors too, that's also a very big factor. The bigger the lumens, the better the image, plus a lot of other factors. But generally, you can say the more lumens that you have on your projector, the easier you will be able to see an image on an architecture. Typically, the luminosity of the projectors that I work with are around 7,000, and that is generally within the range of like consumer grade projectors that are still somewhat affordable. But you'll see much higher lumens, such as, you know, 10, 20, 30,000 that much larger production companies will work with. But then with those, the price starts going up quite significantly. All right. Yes, here's another example from Spokane during laboratory residency. This is just kind of a cell phone shot, but you can see that in here, this is where we're starting to get into mapping some letters specifically and different patterns. And I'll talk more about that in detail about how you can do much more complicated mapping when you are away from the site too. Again, here's just an example. This was on a fireplace. This was at Caldera. And again, another shot at the Burnside Bridge. Cool. So that's some of the work that mobile projection has done. And then I just wanted to show you a couple different links of other folks who I am inspired by and who do very interesting work with projection mapping. Here's a link from Tony Osler, who does really amazing sculptural work with projection mapping. So you can see he will fabricate these like specific objects and then create video works to fit them precisely throughout this installation too. Which is another big factor that we'll talk about in this class is like a lot of times as filmmakers, as video makers, we'll work in the 16:9 format, the rectangular format. And that can work in many different instances. And sometimes that's the format that you want to work in. But when you're thinking about projection mapping, you want to always start with the location first. You want to think about what you're mapping on, what's the shape of it, what's the ratio, dimensions of it, what's the actual sizing of it. That'll help for you to determine, you know, the shape, the ratio, the resolution, all these things that will make it more impactful. Because as you'll see when we get into MadMapper itself, some of the images can be quite cropped if you're still only using the 16:9 formatting. Not to say there's anything wrong with that, but just to think, again, thinking about where you want to end up, like maybe one of these crazy shapes. Yeah, how you want to do that. These are really fun. I like these eyeballs a lot too.
What are the options made of too?
I'm not sure. It looks like some type of plywood, maybe? Yeah. I would say that's a great material, but wood is really expensive now, so maybe suggest something else. These are kind of fun. A lot of his earlier work was with these kind of like doll heads that he would project these faces onto. Really freaky, really fun stuff. That one's spooky. There was something in here that made me think. Something else. Oh, so 3D objects too. That's something to consider, especially if you're doing like more elaborate projection mapping. Today we'll basically be going over 2D, mapping 2D spaces. But there is so much possibility of things that you can do in MadMapper where you could do a 3D scan of an object and then actually place that scan within MadMapper, that you can code it to where it looks like it's manipulating and stretching the material around this 3D object that you can then set up and project in real life too. That's the advanced workshop. Yeah, and then let's see, what else we got? Craig Winslow, I don't know if any of y'all know him. He is from Portland and does really amazing projection mapping work. I just wanted to show you his website briefly. This is in Las Vegas. He did this piece where he worked with the Neon Light Museum to kind of like reinvigorate all of these neon light signs. All of this light that you see right now is projection mapping. None of it is neon light, yeah. So I find that very striking. And I think you can kind of see like in the middle of the installation, there's these like towers that house all the projectors. Let's see if it flashes back to there again.
So I guess the lights weren't functional anymore and the team had like made them functional again in a different way?
Totally, yeah. So instead of the light coming from the bulbs, it's being projected on them. Yeah. So this is an example too of something that's outdoor that is a permanent installation too. And just, oh yeah, you can see these towers are definitely where the projector lights are coming from. So that's really fun. BJ Suavecillo. These are really fun. This is also just another example of a more mobile projection type of project. And thinking about how mapping can be used with different types of content that can work across many different forms and materials. I don't know if this has sound. There you go. Cool. So they're using some other kind of software too, but we don't have time for that. We're gonna move on. But I think something that was interesting about that content was a lot of the animations had black backgrounds, which is something that is important to talk about too. The absence of light looks like there's nothing there. And so a lot of times that's a fun magic trick you can use in projection mapping, that even if you do have a 16:9 format video, it can still appear to look like it's just kind of free floating characters in a space too. Yeah. And then these are some more political uses of projection mapping too. I'm sure many of you have seen this imagery from the summer of 2020. This is probably one of the most unique and brilliant pieces that I saw. Hi there, welcome. And so this is a lot more aligned with protest and using more graphics rather than video itself too. And then what is this? Oh, okay. And then this last piece is just like super spectacular. Like, I think this is maybe credited as like one of like the biggest light projections in the world or like something like that. It's in Chicago. And I think it is something like maybe 14 projectors. Anyways, I'll just let you see. Oh yeah.
Yard on the mark, we take something that's been a blight and make it very bright, and we shine not just in our city, but shine throughout the world. And we're about to experience the largest art light show in the world.
Pretty cool. I like that kind of stuff. It's just really amazing to me to see like that large of a scale of production. And so, you know, I'm not sure exactly if they're using MadMapper, but you could definitely use the software to do that. But it's also a lot of blending the multiple projectors together and those kinds of considerations as well too. And then I also just wanted to let you know that you can, I don't know why I can't click on this right now. There are so many tutorials of MadMapper on YouTube. If you just type in MadMapper into YouTube, MadMapper company itself puts out like tons and tons of tutorials, and they also do like master classes and like every time there's a new upgrade to the software, they'll do like a whole run through of like all the new things that are coming out. And they've been doing a really good job of updating tutorials with things outside of video work too. So there's also Dmx Lights. There's so much that you can do with MadMapper that, you know, it's like I haven't even gotten there because I primarily work in video. But just to let you know, once we finish this workshop, there's so many more tools and experience that can help you out online too. And that's primarily how I learned MadMapper, was through those tutorials. So it's very simple. They're really good at explaining things, and I just cannot recommend it enough. It's really great. Yeah, and then I think maybe before we jump into the software, just kind of, again, talking about the different things to think about when you are projection mapping. Probably like, there's like 3 big things, right, that we briefly covered earlier. One is the video content that you're using, and all of those things that you're considering are within the content are very important. You want to think about, okay, so if we're thinking of a space outside that has low predictability of light control, you want to think about how you can create the content that can fit those spaces best. And I've found that a lot of times the best way to create content for that is to create very high contrast works. And it'll look very different, and we'll see this as we're working through this too. It'll look very different from your screen than it does on the projector and the wall that you're projecting it onto. And that's for many different reasons. Again, it has to do with the luminosity of the projectors, the resolution. It also has to do with the color of the walls, the material of the walls, and again, the ambient lighting that's coming in and ruining all of your hard work. There's a lot of hacks that you can do outdoors. Sometimes you can work with building owners to turn off their lights. Sometimes it can be an easy ask like that. A lot of times I've worked with different city lights that the Parks Bureau is not super excited about turning them off, and you can use different materials to cover them temporarily. Yep, and then you can also do some fun hacks. These are kind of interesting online, where you can basically trick a street lamp into thinking that the sun is still on by like putting your flashlight on like a sensor, and they'll turn off that way. And other ways, yeah. And then, I mean, sometimes it's just unavoidable. Sometimes there's just too much lighting in an area, so sometimes that can just totally cut off the ability to even using that space at all. What else? Yeah, so materiality. So we're looking at the buildings. I would say probably the easiest color of a building to project on is white, or even like a light gray. Sometimes gray can actually be better because it's like adding a little bit more pigment and driving that contrast of the work that you created. Darker colors, brick, can be quite difficult to project on, just because it will, again, deplete the contrast ratio of the work that you have created. Windows can be very tricky to project on. They just let the light straight through. But if you put some kind of like vinyl or film up, a lot of times they work great as either rear projection or capturing the light. And those can be quite interesting too, because it'll look like the projection is kind of just like stuck in the air, and that's really fun too. Great, so this is what MadMapper looks like when you open it up. Pretty blank. I'll kind of just do like a brief run through of what some of these things are that are working in relation to what we will be using. This is a 2-screen panel. This is kind of the main workspace that you're working in. On the left, this checker box that we see right now is our input, and on the left, or excuse me, on the right is our output. So we'll see, maybe I'll just add an object really quickly, and I will make it something other than that. Okay, so as you can see, this box that I'm moving around on the left right now is basically the confines of our input. So I can make it much smaller, and it's kind of cropping the content that we have, or I can make it much larger, and then it's kind of like filling the space in the output that we're using too. And you can move it around each corner. You can select each side, I think, backwards on a, there we go, on PC. It's hard switching back and forth all the time. And then here on the output, you'll see that right now it is the same aspect ratio as our input, but you can change it to become any aspect ratio you want, really. You can do that by stretching it, or I think you can also do it here. Oh, this is changing the input. But right here you can see the resolution. I just changed it manually to 1920 by 1080, and then I can still use these little dots to change the aspect ratio. So when we're looking at this output, this rectangle here, this is basically what the projector is outputting. This whole like kind of lighter gray rectangle is what would be casting a light out of it. And this weird little checker box that we have here is basically a piece of video that we can move in real time with my mouse. And we'll be hooking up the projectors in just a bit too, so you can see how using the software interacts with the actual projection itself. But I just wanted to kind of like do a hard focus on what the software itself is looking like first. But anyways, I think this is probably one of the things that just like really blew my mind when I first started working with the software, is how easy it is to manipulate the materiality of it. You know, if some of you work in Premiere or Final Cut, it's a lot harder just to do all this kind of like wacky stuff. Sorry, I keep moving that around. Yeah, so those are your two basic workspaces that you have, your input and your output. I'm just going to make it so it's fitting the whole output right now. And what I created to make that over here is in this first column. You'll see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. This first one, these are our quads. And they come in a variety of shapes that you can work with. And then they're all listed here. So if I make another one, now we have quad 2. And you can see quad 2 is selected. So this is the input of quad 2. Making it a little bit smaller. And then now I'm moving quad 2 around. And now I'm moving quad 1 around. You can also use different shapes of quads, so you can use a triangle. These are kind of like pre-built, custom for you. If you're using a triangular space, you can very easily spin them around, move them into a corner, make them bigger. It's too big. Do some fun designs with them. Something that I started doing when I first used MadMapper was I was kind of hacking it for more artistic reasons and using it as a collage tool. So without even using like architecture, just creating these different shapes and just being able to move them around really easily. Again, it's a lot harder to do that in Premiere. But it's really fun to just wag them around. We also have circles. These are really fun. Oh, and so you'll see as I'm creating them, again, they're all showing up over here on this left side. You can lock them into place. So now trying to move the circle will not let me because it's locked. I can deselect it and it disappears. Back and forth. You can do that with multiple things. And then this also is tracking the layering. So right now the circle is on top, but I can bring it to the bottom, and now it's behind all of the other materials. So those are really fun. So, you know, as we're looking at mapping these different workshop spaces, these different shaped quads are really helpful for really quick content creations. But what we will get into just a little bit later, once I go through some of the more basic things, is down here is our warping, or excuse me, our mask creating. And then this is where it gets really fun, and we'll look at how you do very specific projection mapping, like what we're here to do. But sticking with the basics for now. So we have these different shapes. Here's our input, here's our output. We can go over and look at, let's just get rid of some of these for simplicity's sake. So we have our quad number 1 hanging out over here. There's a lot of different things just in the input section of it that you can mess with your content. So right on the right side, these are all things that MadMapper has provided as materials for you already. Right now we're using this generator called the test card. That's why it's this black and white checker. But if you go over here on the left, right under the quad generator, we'll call it, you can see there's some simple things that you can change your output with. So right now I'm just doing opacity. So you can go to 0, 100%, anywhere in between. This is really great if you are, well, for a variety of reasons, but I would say that I like to use opacity because it's fun to do layering in MadMapper. So if you have multiple things that you're mixing over, you can use different opacities to create more dynamic images. Again, with like blend mode, maybe I'll add another quad just so we can see something else. So I'll put this kind of funky mad noise is what it's called. So you can see the opacity changing and these things. And then these are the different ways that you can mix the materials on top of it too, like some of them. So you can see with the add, that'll change the opacity. Over is strictly over. And again, these will all change with the different content and materials that you're using and how they interact with each other. But you can kind of see that they're doing different fun things with each different mix of it. We'll stick with over for now. That's the default. And then just going back to our first quad here. So you can change the color of different things over here on the left. Pretty fun, different ways of doing that. There's different FX depending on what you want to do. So actually you could do live chroma key inside of MadMapper, which is really fun. It's all about your workflow. Like if you are typically, doing most of your work in Premiere and have pre-recorded content, maybe these aren't even things that you need to worry about. But say you're working in Touch Designer or you have chroma green content that you're using, it's a really nice option that you can do more of this kind of like mixing and editing within MadMapper as well. Yeah, there's lots of different things. So yeah, I mean, we're just going crazy over here. So then, these are fun too. You can flip things really easily. And again, we'll get into masking in just a bit. But then again, if we look over here, these are other ways that we can work with the different generators and change them too. So like we saw earlier, we can change the resolution. This specifically, again, we're working with this test card of the generator. We can come down here and add the count and go all the way up to 32. I'm sure you could hack this too and do, let's say, 100. Nope, it doesn't like that. I guess the highest is 32. And again, you can change the colors, do whatever kind of things you want. But essentially showing you this because any of these generators and materials that are provided by MadMapper are all hackable. And it's really fun because you can create some really interesting generative materials just using the things that they have provided already. And especially if you did bring video content today, if you didn't, it's fun to kind of mix both of these design elements and create really beautiful installations. So let's see, like, maybe we'll look at this one too. So this is our quad 2. We currently have this mad noise in here. If we restart it, it looks like you can kind of refresh it to start at the beginning of its generation. There's all sorts of types that it has, like this whirly, which is really fun. There's flow. I mean, these are all very different, right, in just a few clicks of things. Wow, that's fun. And then we can change the speed. You can go super crazy, slow it down, maybe make it look a little bit more like a river, like smoky liquid light or something. And then let's see what this strobe does. Just kind of makes it stuttering. What's really fun about all of these parameters too is that you're able to connect them to Midi controllers. So if that's something that you all work with, live performative aspects, you could hook up a Midi, which is, I recommend if that's something that you're interested in doing and doing more live performative type of work, especially in like theatrical productions or live musical events. Hooking up a Midi controller can help you navigate all these different functions very quickly. And I think that that's located just over here in Edit. And all you would do is click on Edit Midi Controls. And with your Midi controller, I'm pretty sure you can just click on whatever you want to do. Say it's like the speed, strobe, the type, whatever. And then just use your Midi controller and assign that to a specific button or knob. And then easy peasy, you're going to town.
If you want them to play with later when you're doing hands-on things, there's a couple in the cupboard there.
Great, yeah, CETI has a few Midi controllers to do that.
And test it and show people if you want later.
Absolutely, cool. And it looks like there's also the possibility of doing that with keyboard controls too. So again, if you're at home doing this and you don't have a Midi controller, you can do the same thing where you are assigning these different parameters to keys just on your keyboard too. But yeah, again, that's more advanced, thinking about performance in MadMapper, but just kind of showing you what the possibilities are with this type of software. Again, so we started with this mad noise and are already making it pretty crazy. There's other things. Again, in each like different generator, there's these different controls that you can have. So, this would be fun if you're performing, maybe having it going back and forth to the beat, or going up and down, go big, go small, anamorphize it. That's fun. And that's cool too. I got this over here too. I'm always discovering new things. It's so vast. There's a lot that you can do. But all of this is to represent that there's a lot that can be personalized just in the materials that they provide for you, which I think is really fun. And again, changing the different colors. Wow, cool. And the brightness. And the contrast. So this is an interesting example of things that I was kind of talking about earlier in terms of what your content looks like and how it will show up differently on, I want to slow it down a little bit so it's not so glitchy. This looks great on the screen right now, or at least you can decipher between the orange and the white in this clip. But that might be a little bit more difficult to see once we're projecting it. And so this is a nice tool where you can really like play with these different brightness and contrast. Like this has a very specific look on the screen, but when it is projecting, it's likely that this will help kind of compensate the differences between the screen and the projector too. So that's one place that you can find it. And then there's also some other places where those can happen too. Where is that default? Color controls. So over here too, this is also a place, this FX control, color controls, is a place where you can do that too. And this is typically, this control center is where I will manipulate a lot of my video content in real time when I'm out on site, to kind of get it to a place that looks much better on the wall than it does currently. But as you can see, it's definitely changing it pretty significantly on the screen. So, you know, it's really the artist's eye at that point, how you want it to look. But there are these controls here, which are really fun. Great. Any questions so far? Good. I know it's a lot. If it's too much, please feel free to tell me to slow down. Great. Something that's also here that's really fun. Let me get rid of this quad. So there's these feathering things, which are really fun too. So when we're mapping, we'll see that this is a very clean, hard cut line of this rectangle. But with the feathering, it's really nice because you can start to get some fade from that. And so, you know, as you're learning and depending on what level of projection precision that you're working in, this can be a nice little trick of the trade to do some light feathering. Sometimes it can take quite a long time to get everything lined up properly. So having the feathering kind of helps mask that type of work. And you can see there's a lot of range in that. You can also do the soft edge, which is a similar technique, but just working specifically from certain sides of it too. Great. And then just to kind of cover a few more of the generators and things that you can import. Like we were talking about earlier, you can import specific images, which I want to import things from my workshop folder. And you can, I'm pretty sure you can drag them in. Yes, you can either drag them in, or you can hit this plus sign to import them, or you can go to File, Import Media, any of those ways, and it will automatically tell it where to go in your content library on this side. You can also upload what they call movies or videos, which are in here. I'm going to upload these to my movies. I'm going to set this one aside for now. And now we have a video file in here. And it's very pink. I'm going to make a new one. It's not so pink. Okay. So this is fun. So if you guys are video creators, animators, what have you, this is a really fun way that you can upload your own content into the software and immediately start working with it. in a larger space while you're mapping it to different things. And so now that we have the video imported, we can see the different ways that you can play with that too. Right now, it's just playing ahead at normal speed. You can pause it. You can reverse it. You can go fast or skip ahead, excuse me. All sorts of different things that you can do to manipulate like that. This is kind of your timeline right here. So again, if you wanted to refresh, you just start the position at the very beginning. You can put it in a specific place that you want it to be. And again, you can change the speed here. And you can also loop. Yeah.
If you wanted to just a certain part of the video, say a person was in it moving, you need to crop them in external program?
It depends. I would say kind of like best practices for MadMapper is that it is probably best to do things in other softwares prior to using MadMapper. It can take a lot of computing power to use the software. So, I mean, you know, if we're talking about just like looping, so if we wanted to, for example, if we're looping this video just for like this like 5 seconds, I can very easily do that right here, but it's putting more computing power, or it's taking more computing power on this laptop. And the more that you add to that, the more likely that it will start stuttering. And that's a great question to talk about that kind of work in the workflow of MadMapper. Is that like any software, any live generative software, the more that you add to it, the harder your computer is going to work. And the harder your computer works, the harder it will be to have the image that you want. So all that's to say, if you can edit your content to look how you want it to look beforehand, before it comes into here, the better. Yeah. And right now, all of these videos that I have are already in this kind of like 16:9 format. But what a lot of folks do in the industry are kind of create these larger collages where it'll look like all of these videos combined into one 16:9 video file, but that they can use and then crop. So like say, I wish I had a better example for you all, but like say there was this video, but it was only in this corner of this kind of like larger video that I was using. I could crop it here and say this was here, and then I could create another one and use this piece here. So it's using less CPU, GPU, all the U's, because it's taking up, it's not having to read as many files at once, if that makes sense. Because as you can, what was that?
It's like sprite packing.
Sprite packing.
In game design, where you put all the animations on one image, so it only loads one image.
Yes.
Index through it.
Absolutely, exactly. Yeah. And so something to consider with that too is like you can see, since it's using the same video file, it's playing them both at the same time, right? So as you're uploading whatever videos to them, just thinking about the sequence of these things happening together too. Yeah.
What if you wanted like the bottom right one to be faster?
That's a good question. So as far as I know, it is difficult to do that when you're using this workflow. But you could do something where you have like a separate video file, or say it's like, oops, is that what we wanted to do? Yeah, say it's this video file but you just have it on a faster channel. And then you could say like, you know, video version 1, video version 2, and do it that way. But I do believe that with MadMapper, once you have one file, it's basically kind of like the overriding like parent file that doesn't allow you to change those different aspects, if that makes sense. But yeah, that's like a huge component of MadMapper, is that it can definitely slow down. And so I mean, you know, we'll be looking at these different arrangements of video files that we'll be using, but something for maybe a more advanced technique is looking into HAP file codec, which you can convert files into HAP through Premiere, and it's basically like a downloadable extension to give you a HAP file. But basically, instead of using an MP4 or a MOV file in your movies, it uses HAP, .hap, and it's much easier for MadMapper to read. But again, that's advanced. That's when you're using maybe any more than like 10 video files at once, and going through them very quickly. So this is kind of a fun aspect of MadMapper, is that we'll see that it's very difficult to, you know, be in person live mapping for something that can be super intricate. This can take hours depending on the design that you're doing to map something of this scale, and especially if you have multiple scenes or are using multiple projectors. You know, there's a lot of work that goes into masking and designing content to go on this type of building. So what's fun about MadMapper is that you can work with a static image and do the design work at home, in your office, whatever, and then go back to the site and then do minor adjustments when you're there too. These are, I chose Pioneer Courthouse because it's always been a spot that I've wanted to map on, but the light pollution down at the square is uncontrollable, and it would take, I don't know, the mayor to sign a petition or something, I don't know. But it's always been a dream of mine to map that building, and it's kind of fun. Yeah.
Mapping, for example, you're mapping based off of this image, right?
Mm-hmm.
Once you go on the field and try to map, project it onto that, how do you control the aspect ratio and scale it up, scale it down?
Yeah. So there's a couple different tricks. The first is to, like this picture, is like, it's always, okay, so the workflow is like, it's always good to go to the site that you want to map from and know exactly where you want to put your projector. And then from there, you can even, you know, just take your cell phone or whatever and basically put it in front of the lens where the light will be projecting on, and knowing that the light will project over the entire space that you want to project on. So for example, you know, if I was able to project from the square, taking a photo like this from the same angle that the projector light is coming from, so that you have roughly a general idea of like where you're going to be, so you can work with this in somewhat accuracy. Of course, once you get there, there's going to be tons of minutia that you're going to have to edit and play around with. But this is a good start. And then that also cuts down on the amount of size changing that you'll have to do there too. I'll show you in a minute too easy ways that you can manipulate when you're on site too, because there will always be editing that you have to do. It's impossible. It's literally impossible to try to set up a projector exactly the same place that you had it for installations like this.
I was wondering, so this is my first time ever even opening the program, and there's a camera, like it accesses my webcam.
Yes.
Is that for, so there's some kind of scanner inherent to the program, is that right?
Yes, there is. Yeah. I do believe that you can use MadMapper to scan 3D objects or spaces too. I have not used it personally, but that is definitely an option. Yeah. And there's other softwares too, Lightform, that uses, like, it has its own sensor that they use too that can like scan a room really quickly. And those are, all those tools are really great, especially for something that's like large scale installation. But what I like so much about MadMapper is that, again, there's like always times that you have to make like minor adjustments too, but really fun to like hack into those different sensors too, for sure. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Actually, that's a really good point too. So you can see there's like these different content spaces that you can pull from too. So we can look at different inputs too. I think, let me see. Did you find that where you can turn on and off your webcam?
I haven't figured it out yet, but I'm looking.
Okay, cool. If you find it, just feel free to shout it out. I forget where it is on the panel. But there is a way that you can turn on your webcam as a content source, which is really fun. As a content generator. You can also, I'm on a PC right now, but you can use either Siphon or Spout to bring in other softwares doing any sort of live generative material too. And if we have time at the end, we'll look into that as well.
I found the webcam. It's over on the right. Oh yeah. Oh, but you can't turn it on. It's right where your mouse is. To the right at the bottom. Those cameras.
Aha! Hi! That's fun. There we go. There it is. That was easy enough. Thank you so much. Hi all in Zoom land. Great, so that was just right here in this live input. You can do the integrated camera. Guessing, well, my OBS is not going through right now. But with Spout, you could also do, I've been using Isadora and Touch Designer to go through Spout, and it basically just creates another channel that you can bring in live generative material. Again, it's good to have a high-powered computer if you're working with multiple softwares and having that kind of workflow, but it is very possible and it's very fun. But we will go back to Pioneer Square. Chilling in the square. So much fun. Okay, so now I'm gonna lock this quad just because I don't want it to move. I want it to chill and just hang out. And I'm also gonna, for the sake of presentation, go into one channel mode so you can see this better. And I'll just be using, for now, I'll just be using some of this generative material so it can show up pretty easily. And maybe I'll actually just, nope, I'm gonna keep it high opacity. So if we were in the real world with our projector, this is what we would see. And let's pretend that this projector is covering light in the entirety of where this image is taking place. But we're like, let's start mapping on this. Look at all this real estate, so much fun. So let's start. So let's just start with the quad, right? but I'm gonna use, too stroby, hold on. Let's do this gradient color. And just for the sake of presentation, I'm gonna turn the opacity down just so we can see what we're working with behind us. But I'm gonna start with this quad and I'm gonna go make it a lot smaller. Like maybe I'll fit it in to here, to this first little space. So this is just like an easy way just to fill this kind of rectangular space that we have here going on there. And as you can see, as I'm starting to like shape this around, this perspective is changing, right? Because this photograph and perhaps our projector is not perfectly square onto this building. So it is starting to look a little wonky, but in real life, that will look like it's fitting specifically into that square. And now, let's say, we're like, that's cool, that's an easy one. Let's just go full out and just go tackle this dome. So I got this other quad I just created, and I wanna map this dome. So again, I'm just gonna pull down my opacity just so we can see what we're working with behind it. And when I have it selected, I'm going to come over to this panel on the bottom. And this area is where we can create masks. And I typically like to use masks much better than trying to use like a triangle and like fit it into the space, because masks work a lot better in maintaining the integrity of a video file, especially when you're using things that are not generative. So, you know, if I were to just manipulate a triangle like that, but used a video file, maybe someone's face would have gotten super squished, or, you know, something's off. And so it's much better to use this technique that I'm about to show you, using the masking, than those other kind of like pre-starter ones. So first what you want to do is kind of get your quad, your like starting quad, into a position that makes sense. So, so right now, you know, we're kind of square. Maybe I'll manipulate it a little bit to kind of like, resemble what the other one's doing, because it's kind of at a slight angle. And now I'm going to go in with my masking tool. So again, my quad is selected. You can see it's highlighted. And then I'm going to click on this little plus sign next to this squiggle. And as I did that, it created mask 1. And so now I have this little cursor that is showing me exactly where I'm about to draw a mask on this quad that I've selected. And so I'm just gonna click. I'm just gonna click around. And what's really fun is that you can do two different ways. You can either click individually with some precision, or you can just draw. And it'll create these kind of Bezier curves for you, which is great. It took them a really long time to create this workflow and to incorporate Bezier curves. I can't tell you how many times I've done domes or arches where it's like literally like clicking a million times. So it's really fun that they've upgraded that. Thank you, MadMapper folks. So again, I'm just going to draw really quickly. Go in. Oh yeah, right, I'm just going to click, one second, I'm just going to click enter. to finish that mask. And then the opacity is over here on the left, just right under the quads. Yeah. Great. So now, we have this mask. Right now, it cut out the chunk of content that we want. But this is nice because we can kind of see where we messed up and how we can change that around. And this is fun too. So this is the Bezier. So you have these little controls that you can really help get more precision on your curves. And you know, this was just a quick draw, but you get the idea of what we're trying to do. Kind of moving things around. But then the trick is to do invert mask, and now it's just the content that you want on the dome that we were looking for. And again, you can just go crazy, you know, getting into all of that too. But then you can see when you're highlighted on the mask, it's green, so you know it's a mask, but when you click away, you can see just what the projection will look like too. Would you like me to run through the mask again, or do you guys feel good about that?
Do it one more time.
Sure, yeah. So I'll do, maybe I'll do this triangle now. So like I said, better to use the masking options than some of the kind of pre-made quads. So just added a quad. I'm gonna lower the opacity so we can see. And then I'll go down to this little plus squiggle mark, click create mask, and then use my cursor to click around exactly where I want my projection to be. And you can click and then you can hit enter to complete the mask connection. And then once you have that, you can hit invert mask, and there you go. So that's really fun, and that's definitely the best way to do the mapping aspects of that. And as you can see, it can be pretty tedious, specifically if you're working with a lot of different shapes. You know, a lot of people will do, like either we'll start with the whole building, oops, maybe have something that covers the whole thing, and then they'll be like, okay, let's just like knock out these columns, or let's do something on all the borders, or you know, let's do like the arches within the windows. It can take a lot of time, and so that's why this workflow of like using a photograph of a space is really nice, because you can spend as many hours as you need to off-site in the warm instead of in the cold, which it most likely is in Portland. And what else? Oh, I think there is just one other thing that I wanted to show you that's kind of fun, specifically with this type of design too. So we were looking at quads. They also have this that's a line, basically. So you can do the same thing, but you're just drawing lines, which is, I think, a really fun design element for this too. So, you know, I just created a shape. And then what's cool about these too is that you can use, you know, video content, you can do whatever you want. But let's look at this line pattern. You can see right now it's this line kind of going around. But you can, again, just like totally make it into something new, just using these parameters over here. Whee, kind of noisy. So that's really fun. So again, like, you know, you can incorporate both of these pieces of content to create really beautiful installations. And again, this was only just using generative material too. Cool. Cool. Does anyone have questions about that before we start hooking up projectors and hardware? Yeah.
I have a simple question. Is there a way if you have a rectangle to just like change the size on one axis?
Yes.
Rather than like have a scale.
Yeah, let's see. So maybe. So like, for example, you'd want it like, I think it would be like a way of like manipulating it with both the input and the output too. So if you wanted it to only be like this much of the video, changing in the input, but then having to also change the aspect ratio of the output that you have too. Yeah.
Is there like a snap or something? Maybe like the bottom match the top versus line?
Yeah, yes, there's a way to do that. I think it has something to do with this magnet and just like how you're working with it too. Like you can see it's like kind of snapping into the corners.
Okay.
There's probably easier ways to do that too. But again, it's like, you know, it's nice, especially when you're on site, to have these like different editing options. But it's always better to kind of have things more prepared for the site too. But you know, when you're in the field, it's like you can't like slow down and get in Premiere and all that too. So yeah. Other questions? Anyone online have a question?
Is there any sort of like context awareness in terms of like resolution? I know you're probably going to get into the projector requirements here in a second, but I guess I was just curious, like, is there anything in MadMapper where you can be like, you know, my projector is only 720p and I'm trying to do this large scale thing, it's not going to render correctly. You know, you either need to like have a lower resolution video or improve the resolution of the project or something like that.
Totally. My best suggestion is to always match the resolution of your video content with the resolution of your projector. Yeah.
But right now it has no context of, you know, the throw distance to the building.
Right.
Or any of that stuff which impacts that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
That
just
too.
didn't know if I had any sort of way to like plug in like a project setting to be like, you know, here's how far I'm throwing the image. These little dots that are showing up in your line there like aren't going to render at all, basically.
Yeah. There's probably a lot that you could deep dive into MadMapper about like presets for that type of thing too, or like, you know, saving them, I guess, if that's what you're asking too. I would say that for me, what I've learned with that is just really just like on site, like messing with the content while I'm there too. So a lot of times,
Knowing your projector.
yeah, knowing your projector. Yeah, I would say that like most times I like don't have the lens scoped all the way out. Like I try to use it like as, you know, if you have a long distance projector, to have it as focused in as you can. It's brighter, there's higher resolution that way. There are like very specific parameters for how far away you can have your projector from the surface before it starts looking like garbage, or, you know, air quote garbage. But it's also, again, it's the artist's eye and how you want to do it. Yeah, totally. What your intentions are. But like the brighter, the higher resolution of an image is, yeah, not wanting to blow it out too. Because a lot of times it's easy to be tempted to be like, oh, I have one projector and I can cover this whole thing with one projector. But you're going to lose a lot doing that too. And
yeah,
so,
I guess that's where I was going with it. It's like, obviously, you either need like, you're going to need multiple projectors for this. Is there any way that MadMapper could be like, hey, by the way, you're going to need a lot more projectors for this?
it will not tell you that,
Yeah.
but I will tell you that. Yes. And that's actually a good point that we'll get to when we start plugging everything in too. But There's this whole other section that we haven't looked at yet that is very important to this practice that we are working on, which is this projector section. And so very similarly to the input and output of our video content is the same to the video projectors too. So let me go back and do that. So right now there's just one projector that's kind of like the starting point default for MadMapper. You can very easily hit second projector, and now you can see both of these are basically covering whatever you would want it to cover, and you can move them around really easily too. So let's say that instead of one projector, we're going to use two. And you can move those around. And of course, you know, there's like some blending techniques of making this happen too. Sorry, let me make this bigger. Oops, where did you go?
Is it more or less or not even at all helpful to kind of even adjust the brightness or kind of edit the primary photo that you have to make it like dark at nighttime?
Yes. Yes, totally. Yeah, the more editing that you can do, yeah, in Photoshop or whatever to brighten or make the contrast more drastic will definitely help before you put it into MadMapper for sure. And I would say that that's a really big part of my workflow too, is even in just Premiere, like making the whites whiter, contrast higher, even like specifically not using certain colors, like oftentimes I'll stay away from like violets or blues just because they are really hard to show up on outdoor surfaces too. Yeah. But yeah, so, you know, you can hook up, you could, let's see, I don't know if there's, whoa, you can do 13, 14, 15, 16 projectors. I don't know whose computer can handle that many, but it's possible that you could do that. Most laptops can have at least two outputs that work for this. And that's typically what I work with, one computer for two projectors. And you can see this output size here too. And then something, you can also change, you can flip things around in projectors. So sometimes like, maybe that's too difficult to explain without looking at the projectors, but I'll just say that you can designate each projector too through MadMapper. So right now, only one destination is showing up because I'm only connected to this projection screen that we're working with in the workshop space. But once I add a second projector, this destination will also show another projector too. Yeah, so you'll have most likely two HDMI cords coming out, and then depending on whatever dongle or adapter that you need. But most projectors use HDMI for the input. And then depending on the computer, it's either HDMI out, USB-C, or Thunderbolt, my favorite. Yes, so, and we'll look into this now as we start to hook up the projectors to the computers too, so we can see how that goes. But essentially, and for those of you at home too, if you can still follow us along with a projector or any output that you might have, once you're in this section, what you'll want to do is go to Output, and then go into full screen mode, and then that will push out the content that you have designated both of your projectors to, and then your laptop screen or your desktop screen, whatever you're using, will still be this workspace. So you'll be able to work in real time mapping these projectors while you're still looking at your inputs and outputs too. Very cool. Does anyone have any questions before we move into projector time? Feeling good. Okay, great. Yeah.
I don't know if you, I want to jump ahead also, but I don't know if you have touch into like programming in this mode and doing like the designing from the negative ratio or the negative aspect of it, and then taking a picture of the building, cropping the building out, and then designing within that.
Oh, I've never done that before, but that's really interesting. And I think that that would probably provide a lot more like maybe unique opportunities instead of like working so much with the architecture itself, you know, like my like the way my brain works is that I would be like, I want to like map every like nook and cranny and like get in here and like look at all these different things. But I also find that really interesting techniques are when it's like you just know that this whole space is able to hold light and that you don't even have to worry about all these like minutia of details, that sometimes it's actually more beautiful to look at the building as a whole as a canvas rather than like going into like such deep design elements and aspects of it too. So that's interesting if that's kind of what you mean with like the negative space.
I saw like, watched like 1,000 TED Talks on this one before I got in.
Yeah.
And I saw somebody wanted to spray paint a building similar to this, but they didn't, obviously didn't spray paint the real building, but they took the negative of that building and put it on another surface and had artists spray paint that.
Huh.
And projected it back onto the building. So it looked like they
Oh, yeah.
did a ton of spray paint.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, I love that idea. I love that. Yeah. Yeah, so that's great. I mean, like, and that's probably maybe like even a better way to think of like masking this too is I always like to make one big scene that's kind of like the whole building, to do something similar to that where it's just like you can kind of see like a whole video just like wash across it and just see how it all reacts to moving through those different spaces too, because that's a huge part of it is like how is the video actually like navigating this materiality of it too, which is really fun. One last thing that I will say before we move on, MadMapper is so extensive and we have only just scratched the surface, and as we get a little bit more hands-on, I'll kind of step back and just help everyone troubleshoot. But essentially, you know, like I was saying, there's things you can do with like Dmx, more like kind of 3D objects. There's so much you can do. You can do like a lot more things with like sound reaction, which is really fun, again, with thinking of performativity. But something that I use quite often are these scenes. And this is a really easy way to have multiple scenes that you're working with. So if you wanted to have, so say it's like you wanted to have multiple, you know, patches going through. I'm gonna click scene, just click it. It saves exactly what this looks like now. And then I can come in here and be like, okay, actually in the next scene, I want it to look like this with all these other crazy things going on. And now I hit scene 2, create scene, and it'll save it exactly as it is. And now I can go back and forth to these two different options that I just created. And you can also fade in between them. So I'd say, like, I want this to be a 5-second fade, 5-second fade. So now it'll take 5 seconds to go to that. You can also autoplay it, or you can designate all of them up here too. And then of course there's even more here, changing the duration in beats, you know, let it go in a loop, what have you. There's so much fun to be had. It's really endless. But we'll stop there, just so you guys can start getting your hands on it and really just seeing how everything connects too.